My aunt pointed at my garage and shouted, "Your uncle promised me that classic car. Hand me the keys." I held up the signed title and smiled. "Keep arguing. You're making my fraud report even easier." The whole thing started because my uncle left behind one car, one garage full of parts, and just enough paperwork to turn a family into strangers. It was a 1970 Chevelle that had spent most of its life in pieces. My uncle had bought it when he was still young enough to think every project would take a summer, and every problem had a simple fix. By the time I was old enough to remember it, the car had become a kind of family landmark. It sat under a dust sheet in the back of his garage, half restored, half forgotten, always promising that someday it would run again. My uncle was the one adult in my life who never treated me like I was wasting time when I asked questions about tools. Engines or old junk no one else cared about. My dad worked long hours and was practical to the point of being blunt. My mom liked nice things and hated clutter. My Aunt Denise, my uncle's older sister, liked control. She always had. Even before all this, I remember she had a way of talking that made every conversation feel like a negotiation where I had somehow already lost. She was the sort of person who remembered every favor she had ever done for anyone and forgot every favor anyone had ever done for her. My uncle was the opposite. He was patient, calm, and weirdly generous with his time. He did not talk much, but when he made a promise, he meant it. That mattered later. For most of my 20s, the Chevelle was just part of the background of his life. It sat under a cover in his garage while he worked on it in the evenings after his shift at the machine shop. He was always buying small parts at swap meets or from guys he knew through the old car crowd. I helped when I could. At first that meant carrying boxes, holding a flashlight, and handing him the wrong wrench 3 times before he finally stopped pretending it was funny. Later it meant weekends spent sanding panels, cleaning bolts, and trying not to strip threads on anything expensive. I had my own job, so I was there when I could be there. I worked as a facilities tech for a school district. The pay was not great, but it was steady, and it left me with enough nights and weekends to keep showing up. That ended up mattering more than I knew. My uncle never gave me the car out of nowhere. That is important. This was not some dramatic deathbed gift with tears and a dramatic speech. It was more practical than that. A year before he died, he asked me to stop by the bank with him on a Tuesday morning because he wanted to settle some paperwork. He had just come off a bad stretch with his heart and was tired of pretending he had forever to finish things. I remember because I had taken the morning off and was annoyed about it. Not at him, at life. That was the day he had the title notarized and transferred to me, not later, not after the funeral, not when everybody started acting like experts on what he would have wanted. Before all of that, he had already decided. He did not make a big deal out of it. He just said that I had put in the work. I had never nagged him to sell it, and I had respected the car enough to help him keep it alive. He also said in his way that my aunt would turn the thing into a family hostage if he left it floating around as a vague promise. He was not wrong. I kept the signed title in a fireproof folder with other important documents because I am boring in the way boring people survive family chaos. I had a copy of the registration, insurance records, receipts for parts, and the bank notarization slip. I did not think I needed all of it. I just did it because that is what I do when something matters. At the time, I thought I was being careful. Later, I realized I was being trained. My uncle died in early spring. It was sudden but not shocking, if that makes any sense. He had been in and out of the hospital for months. He had the kind of health issues that never seemed dramatic enough to frighten people until they all added up at once. His last week was messy and slow and full of phone calls nobody wanted to make. I was there more than anyone outside the immediate family, not because I was the closest by blood, because I was the one who showed up without making it about myself. That sounds noble, but most of the time it just meant I was tired and trying to remember which pharmacy had which prescription. The funeral was awkward in the way family funerals always are. Everybody was polite until they thought no one was listening. Then the old resentments came out in little pieces. My Aunt Denise made a show of being devastated. She touched everyone's arm, collected sympathy like tips, and kept talking about how close she had been to her brother even though she had not visited him much in the last 2 years. I did not say anything. I was too drained to care who performed grief the loudest. The car was mentioned exactly once that day. A cousin asked me what was happening with the Chevelle. I told him it was in the garage and I was keeping it covered until the estate stuff was sorted. That should have been the end of it. It was not. Within a week, my aunt started sending texts to my mother, then to my cousin, then eventually to me through a group chat I should have left immediately. The messages were not direct threats at first. They were all in that slippery middle space where someone pretends to be reasonable while trying to push you into agreeing with them. She said the car should stay in the family. She said my uncle had always talked about her being the one who understood old things. She said I was getting ahead of myself with the paperwork. She said it would be simpler if I just brought the keys over so everyone could sort it out properly. I ignored the first few. Then I got a certified letter from the DMV. That was the first time I felt the floor shift. The letter said that a duplicate title application had been submitted for the Chevelle. It also said the application was being held because the original title had recently been transferred and there were inconsistencies in the supporting documents. I remember standing in my kitchen at 6:40 in the morning with the letter in one hand and coffee going cold in the other. I had a very specific feeling then. Not anger, not even panic, more like the beginning of a headache from hell. I called the number on the letter before I even put my shoes on. The DMV clerk was careful and patient. She asked for the VIN, the name on the original title, and the date of transfer. Then she told me something that made my stomach go hard. Someone had submitted the duplicate application with a mailing address that belonged to my aunt. She did not phrase it like gossip. She said it like a fact that had already been logged into a system. She also said the supporting paperwork included a statement claiming the title had been lost and that the vehicle had been verbally gifted. That was not how the Chevelle was transferred. The title had not been lost. It had been signed in front of a notary. There was a receipt. There were copies. There was no verbal anything. I told the clerk I had the title in my possession and asked what I needed to do. She said I should bring in the original documents, file a fraud statement, and probably speak with probate counsel if the estate was involved. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. I was not trying to be dramatic. I was just trying to understand how this had gone from family tension to someone trying to rewrite ownership on paper. My first thought was that my aunt had made a stupid mistake out of grief. My second thought was that grief was not normally this organized, so I started digging. I pulled every car-related paper I had and laid it out on the dining room table. The notarized title transfer, the bill of sale, which was really more of a gift note saying the vehicle was being transferred with no money exchanged, the maintenance receipts, the photos I had taken of the car over the years, the bank slip from the day it was signed, even old texts from my uncle about parts and paint codes. I made copies of everything. I scanned everything. Then I called the probate office and asked what had been filed. That call made things worse. There was a petition listing the Chevelle as an estate asset. That alone was not unusual because people list things before they know the whole picture. What was unusual was that the petition had been filed by Denise, and the vehicle value she listed was not the value of a rough old project car. It was the value of a restored collector vehicle. She had written it up like the car was ready to be sold at auction. It was not. At that point, it was still mostly disassembled, though it was cleaner and more complete than it had ever been. That meant she had either no idea what she was talking about, or she had a very specific idea of what she wanted the car to be worth. I went to my uncle's house that afternoon because the executor had not changed the locks yet and I still had a key. The garage was exactly as I had left it at the funeral. Dust cover on the car, tool chest closed, parts bins stacked along the wall, the smell of oil and old rubber and stale concrete. I stood there longer than I expected. My uncle had spent years in that garage. I had spent years in it too. It was one of the few places in my life where I had ever felt like I was learning something useful just by being there. Now it felt like a crime scene waiting for a camera crew that never came. On the workbench was a stack of junk mail, a dead flashlight, and one manila envelope I did not recognize. It had not been there before. The envelope contained a copy of the duplicate title application. The signature on the application was supposed to be my uncle's. It was not. It looked like his name in the same way a child's drawing of a dog looks like a dog, close enough at a glance. Wrong everywhere it mattered. The address listed was my aunt's. The witness line had been completed with a name I recognized as one of my cousin's drinking buddies. The notarization was messy enough that even I could tell something was off. The seal was smudged, and the dates did not line up right. I took pictures of all of it. Then I called the notary office listed on the form. That was when I learned the notary on the document had been suspended 2 months earlier for misconduct unrelated to my family, which was the sort of detail that sounds small until it makes your skin crawl. I did not accuse anyone yet. I did not call my aunt and scream. I did not send a rage text. I kept my head down and started collecting facts. That was the first real decision I made that kept me from getting crushed later. I asked the probate attorney who was handling the estate to send me certified copies of the filings. He was one of those older attorneys who speaks in sentences so dry they sound like weather reports. He confirmed that the car had been listed in the estate because Denise had filed paperwork claiming it was still owned by my uncle at his death. When I sent him my notarized title transfer, he got noticeably less vague. He told me, in lawyer language, that the vehicle likely was not part of the estate if the transfer had been completed before death. He also told me not to let anyone take possession of the car until the matter was resolved. That would have been enough for most people. For my aunt, it apparently was an invitation to get louder. She showed up at my house the next Saturday with my cousin Mark and a rented pickup. I was in the driveway cleaning out the back of my own truck when I saw them pull in. I knew immediately that this was not a social visit. Denise got out first. She had on sunglasses and the kind of serious face people use when they want to look morally correct before any facts are discussed. Mark stayed near the truck like he had been told to do the hard labor if things got physical. I did not let myself get rattled. I have learned that when somebody comes to your property with backup, they are usually counting on you to be emotional enough to make a mistake. So I kept my voice low, stood straight, and let them talk first. What came out of her mouth was basically the same story she had been spreading through the family. She said my uncle had promised her the Chevelle years ago. She said I was taking advantage of a dead man's paperwork. She said she had been there for him, in a way I had not. She said the car belonged with her side of the family because she had memories tied to it. That part was the funniest and saddest part at the same time, because I know for a fact she could not have named the trim level if someone had offered her money. I asked her why she had filed paperwork listing the car as part of the estate if it had already been promised to her. She started talking over herself after that. She said my uncle had been confused. She said the hospital meds had made him forget what he wanted. She said the title had probably been lost. She said she had only been trying to protect the family from outsiders. That was when I realized this was not a misunderstanding. This was a plan that had gone sideways because I had not been careless enough to make it easy. I went inside, got the folder, and came back with the title. I did not wave it around. I just held it where she could see the name on the front. The transfer date was before the funeral, before the estate filing, before any of her little papers. Her face changed in a way I will never forget, not into anger right away, into calculation. That was the moment she stopped arguing like a grieving sister and started thinking like someone caught in a corner. She tried to insist the signature had been coerced. She tried to say my uncle never meant for the transfer to be final. She tried to say a lot of things that would have sounded better if they were not colliding with a notarized title and a bank record. I told her I had already spoken to the DMV. I told her they had the duplicate application. I told her they knew the mailing address was hers. That made her go very still. Mark looked at her like this was the first time he had realized the adults in the room were not all on the same page. She then did what people in trouble always do when they think intimidation is still available. She got louder. She accused me of stealing from the family. She accused me of hiding the car from the estate. She said I was using my dead uncle as an excuse to keep something that should have been shared. I did not raise my voice. I told her I had filed a fraud report that morning. That was not true yet. I had filled out most of it. The actual report got submitted that afternoon, but the lie worked because it stopped her mid-spiral. I could see her trying to figure out whether I was bluffing. I was not. I had already saved the DMV correspondence, the duplicate application, the notary records, the estate filing, and the certified title transfer. I was already tired enough to stop caring whether she liked me. I told her that if she wanted to keep arguing, she was making the fraud report easier by the second. That line landed harder than I expected, not because it was dramatic, because it was true. She changed tactics and started crying, not subtle crying, the kind where a person wants the room to accommodate the performance. She said she had only wanted what was fair. She said she had spent years watching her brother pour money into the car and had assumed it would stay in the family. She said I was turning a sentimental thing into a legal thing. That part almost got to me because she was right about one thing. It had become a legal thing, but she was the one who had dragged it there with forged paperwork and an estate claim. I told her that if she thought the car should have gone to her, she should have asked when he was alive. She said she had. That was the first time she had said anything that sounded almost honest. I believed she had probably asked. I also believed my uncle had probably said no. That would explain a lot. My uncle was not cruel, but he was very hard to move once he made up his mind. And Denise had a lifetime of assuming persistence was the same thing as entitlement. The confrontation ended because I did not give her a target. She had expected screaming, threats, maybe a tantrum she could retell later as proof that I was unstable. Instead, she got a guy standing in his driveway holding a title and saying almost nothing. Eventually, she left with Mark and the rented pickup. I watched them go from the porch like a man watching bad weather move down the street. I thought that would be the end of the public part. I was wrong again. 2 days later, I got a call from a deputy. He asked me to come in with the original title and any paperwork related to the transfer. That was when I found out my aunt had not just filed estate paperwork. She had also filed a police report claiming the Chevelle had been unlawfully taken from my uncle's property before the death certificate was processed. That was the moment the whole thing became more serious than family drama. The deputy was polite, which made it worse somehow. He did not treat me like a suspect, but he also did not act like this was a misunderstanding they could all laugh about later. He took copies of everything: the title, the bank notarization slip, the DMV letter, the duplicate application, the estate filing, the photos I had taken of the signature mismatch, the notary suspension record. He also asked if I knew who had physical access to the garage after my uncle died. I told him the truth. Technically, several family members had been there for the funeral. Practically, Denise had been the only one acting like she had a claim. The deputy told me they had already noticed problems with the signature and the notary. He said the report had been kicked over to a fraud investigator because the application looked like someone had tried to create paperwork after the fact. That was the first time I felt the story turning in my favor. Not because I was happy, because the facts had become too ugly to ignore. For the next week, I heard bits and pieces through my mother, my cousin, and one aunt on the other side of the family who had no patience for anyone's nonsense. Apparently, Denise had told people I was keeping the car out of greed. Apparently, she had also told some of them that the title had been hidden somewhere in the garage and that I had found it after my uncle died, which would have been a clever accusation if it were not completely false. The problem with lying through family gossip is that eventually you run into someone who actually knows the timeline. My cousin Jenna was the one who accidentally helped me most. She was Denise's daughter, but unlike her brother and unlike Denise, she did not like chaos. She called me late one night and sounded embarrassed before she even said anything. She told me she had found a stack of old emails while helping her mom look for tax stuff. One of them was from my uncle to my aunt, sent months before he died, in which he had clearly stated that the Chevelle was being transferred to me because I had done the restoration work and she was not to interfere. Jenna was not trying to betray her mom. She was trying to understand what she had gotten dragged into. I asked her to forward the email. She did. That email changed everything. It was not dramatic. It was not some movie scene with a hidden confession. It was a plain, boring message from my uncle laying out exactly what he intended. He said the car was mine. He said the title transfer was already handled. He said Denise should leave it alone. He even noted that if she tried to make trouble, the paperwork would be easy to verify. The message was dated nearly a year before he died. That mattered. A lot. I sent that email to the probate attorney and the DMV investigator. After that, they stopped treating Denise's version like a family disagreement. They started treating it like a deliberate attempt to override an established transfer. The attorney called me and said the estate could not claim the car as property if the transfer had been completed. He also said the fraudulent duplicate application might create separate legal consequences for anyone who signed or submitted it. That was the first time I heard the phrase civil and criminal exposure in relation to my aunt, and I did not enjoy hearing it. I did not want jail for her. I did not want a giant family disaster. I wanted her to stop trying to take my car and stop lying about my uncle. Unfortunately, the way law works is not based on what I want. A week later, the investigator asked me to come in again because they had compared the signatures. That was when I learned the duplicate application had been signed in a way that clearly did not match my uncle's known handwriting. The investigator did not say forged like he was reading from a movie script. He said the signature appeared inconsistent with the bank records and prior documents. He also said the witness name on the application was someone who had no business acting as a witness and had already admitted he was told to sign without reading carefully. That guy folded almost immediately when questioned. Apparently, he had been asked by my cousin Mark to sign what he was told was a harmless family document. That was exactly the kind of stupid move that makes family messes spread. Mark had not been masterminding anything. He had just been too eager to help his mom and too lazy to ask questions. The investigator also asked me about the mailing address used for the duplicate request. It matched Denise's home. He asked if she had access to my uncle's mail before he died. I said yes. That was another thing I had not thought much about at the time. She had been picking up his mail for a while because she said she was helping with errands. In hindsight, that had probably been part of it. In the moment, I just thought she was being useful in a way that kept her busy. I had given her too much credit. That is one of the uglier lessons in all this. People do not always announce themselves as thieves. Sometimes they show up as help. By the time the estate attorney sent out a formal notice, Denise had already started backing away from her public story. She stopped saying the car had been promised to her in front of people who might remember the title transfer date. She stopped talking about how confused my uncle had been. Instead, she shifted into wounded victim mode and told anyone who would listen that the family was tearing itself apart because I cared more about an old car than people. I found out about that because my mother repeated it to me in the exact tired voice of someone who wished the problem would just disappear. My mom and Denise had never been close, but my mom was one of those people who hates open conflict so much she will sometimes lean toward whatever makes the room quieter. She asked me whether I could just let Denise keep the car if it would avoid a bigger mess. That was the closest my mom came to telling me to hand over something I had legally owned for months. I was hurt, but I was also tired enough to answer honestly. I told her that if I did that, it would not end the mess. It would only teach Denise that lying loudly worked. My mom went quiet after that. A few days later, she called back and apologized. That meant more than I expected. My dad, for his part, looked at the paperwork, shook his head, and said I had been right to keep every scrap of it. He is not a sentimental man, but he understands systems. He understood immediately that the car had become leverage. He also understood that people who use leverage usually keep reaching for more. The next complication came from the insurance company. Because the Chevelle had still been on my uncle's policy until his death, someone had to handle the transfer and notify them of the estate situation. The claims rep asked me a series of boring questions about the vehicle's condition and ownership history. When I explained the title transfer, she flagged the policy notes because the estate filing and the duplicate title attempt did not line up. That triggered yet another internal review. I know that sounds like overkill, but in practice it meant every institution involved was quietly comparing notes. That is what people like Denise do not understand. A family lie can survive around a dinner table. It does not survive the DMV, probate court, a bank, a notary suspension, and an insurance file all looking at the same dates. The more she pushed, the more paper she created. The more paper she created, the easier it was to prove she should have left it alone. 2 weeks after the first confrontation, she tried one last move. She showed up at the garage with her husband and a locksmith. I was not there at the time, which she probably thought gave her an opening. My neighbor texted me because he saw strangers messing with the garage door. By the time I got home, the locksmith was standing awkwardly near the driveway, and my aunt was trying to explain that she just needed to secure family property. What she did not know was that the estate attorney had already warned the executor not to release or alter access to the garage until ownership was determined. What she also did not know was that I had forwarded that warning to the deputy. So when she tried to get the garage lock changed, the deputy who had already been assigned to the fraud review happened to be available to make a visit. That part sounds lucky, but it was really just timing. The deputy took one look at the situation, reviewed the paperwork again, and told her to leave the property. He did not make a huge scene. He did not need to. The presence of an officer is often enough to puncture the fantasy that you can bully your way through a legal problem. She left furious. I came home to find the locksmith gone, the door untouched, and my neighbor looking like he had watched a soap opera in real life. That night I stayed in the garage for a while after everyone went home. I stood by the Chevelle and tried to imagine what my uncle would think about all of it. I think he would have been tired. I think he would have been disappointed in Denise. I also think he would have been annoyed that I let it drag on as long as I did before fully trusting the paperwork. He used to tell me that old cars and old family issues had one thing in common. If you ignore the rust long enough, it spreads under the paint. He was right. The investigator called me 3 days later and said they had enough to move forward. He explained that the duplicate title application had been submitted with false information, the signature was not legitimate, and the witness had already admitted he had not been honest about what he signed. He also said Denise was being given a chance to cooperate before the matter got referred more broadly. I asked what cooperate meant in this case. He said it usually meant admitting she had overreached and withdrawing the claim. That turned out to be exactly what happened. Not because she had a spiritual awakening, because she finally understood that the paper trail did not care how angry she was. The estate attorney sent a formal notice acknowledging the prior transfer. The probate claim on the Chevelle was withdrawn. The DMV marked the duplicate title request as fraudulent and closed it out with a note. The police report she had filed did not go anywhere because the title transfer had been completed before death, and the fraud investigator kept a copy of the whole mess in case anyone decided to keep lying. That should have been the end of it. In a sense, it was. In another sense, it was just the beginning of the family fallout. Denise did not apologize. She did something worse. She acted like she had been misunderstood. She told people she had been overprotective and emotional and that the system had unfairly taken my side because I was the one with the paperwork. That was such a classic Denise move that I almost laughed when I heard it. The paperwork was literally the point. Still, a few relatives believed her for a while. That is what made the next part so satisfying. My uncle's old friend from the machine shop, a guy named Leon who had helped him rebuild the engine block years earlier, came by the garage one Saturday. He had known about the title transfer because he had been there when my uncle first talked about it. He was older, blunt, and not at all interested in family politics. He looked over the Chevelle, looked at the papers I had taped inside a folder on the bench, and then quietly told my father that my uncle had been clear for years. The car was going to me. Not Denise, not the estate, me. Leon also told my father that my uncle had been worried Denise would try something after he died, which was why he had pushed the title transfer through early. Hearing that made me feel both vindicated and sad. Vindicated because I had not been crazy. Sad because my uncle had clearly expected drama from his own sister and had prepared for it. The fact that he knew her well enough to do that still bothered me. A week later, Jenna sent me another message. This one was not about the car. It was about the way Denise had handled the rest of the estate. Apparently, she had also tried to claim certain tools and some of the workshop equipment as hers because she thought they were all part of one vague family property pool. That claim went nowhere too, because my uncle had inventory notes and receipts for half of it. At that point, the whole family started realizing that he had been much more organized than anyone gave him credit for. He had not just been a guy with a garage full of junk. He had been quietly preparing for the exact kind of mess that followed his death. That realization changed the mood at family gatherings for a while. Nobody wanted to say his name too loud because it reminded them how many assumptions had been wrong. For me, it also felt like a lesson I had earned the hard way. People think conflict is won by volume. Most of the time it is won by whoever kept the better records. I spent the rest of that summer slowly getting the Chevelle back into shape. I did not suddenly turn into a master mechanic. I just kept going. I ordered parts. I checked numbers. I spent weekends cleaning old grime-off pieces that should have been labeled better years ago. A friend from work helped me with the wiring harness. My dad came over once and pretended not to care while he actually cared a lot. Even my mom started bringing over sandwiches when she knew I would be in the garage all day. It was weird how the whole family cooled down once the legal threat disappeared. Not friendly, just less poisonous. Denise, on the other hand, stopped coming around entirely. She did not even show up at the next holiday dinner, which was fine by me. A few people said she felt humiliated. Probably true. A few people said I should let it go because family is family. I had already let enough go. I just refused to give up the one thing I had legally and honestly earned. The strangest part was how ordinary the aftermath became. No grand courtroom scene, no dramatic arrest, no cinematic confession, just a closed DMV case, a withdrawn probate claim, a few uncomfortable family phone calls, and a car in my garage with its title finally matching the truth. A month after the whole thing settled, I got a packet in the mail from the fraud investigator. It was mostly routine closure paperwork, but included was a summary of the duplicate title attempt and the false statement made in support of it. Seeing it in writing made everything feel real in a way the arguments had not. My aunt had not just been loud. She had tried to manufacture ownership. She had tried to use grief and family pressure to make everyone else accept a lie. It failed because I had done the boring things right. I had kept the title. I had kept the bank slip. I had kept the email. I had made copies. I had not let her bully me into giving away the only proof that mattered. I still think about what would have happened if I had handed her the keys that first day just to keep the peace. She would have found a way to keep the car or at least bury me in legal noise until I gave up. Instead, the paper trail made her own story collapse. That is the part I wish more people understood. Calm is not passive when it is backed by records. It is a weapon. By the end of the year, the Chevelle was finally in one piece again. Not perfect, not show-ready, but running. The first time it fired up in my garage, I had to sit on the workbench for a minute because I was suddenly way more emotional than I expected. It was not just the car. It was the last thing my uncle had trusted me with, surviving a whole family trying to rewrite it after he was gone. I took it down the street that weekend, just a slow test drive around the block. Nothing dramatic, just enough to hear the engine breathe under load and feel the steering settle. My neighbor waved like we had both been waiting on this for years. My dad stood in the driveway with his hands in his pockets and looked almost proud. That alone was worth all the noise. Denise never got what she wanted. She did not get the car, she did not get the garage access. She did not get the estate claim. She got exactly what her own paper trail deserved. The last I heard, the investigator's report had made it impossible for her to keep pretending she was the injured party. Some relatives still talk to her. Some do not. I do not really care anymore. We are cordial when we have to be, but that is about it. I learned that blood does not make somebody honest. It just makes the lies harder to ignore. The Chevelle is still mine. The title is in my file cabinet now, not because I am afraid of losing it again, but because I respect what it costs to keep it. Every time I open that folder, I remember how close I came to letting someone bully me into surrendering what was already mine. I also remember how useful calm can be when the other side is desperate. I did not win because I was louder. I won because I was ready. And because when my aunt tried to turn a promise into a theft, I had the signed title, the receipts, the bank records, the email, and the fraud report sitting in the same folder, waiting for her to make one more mistake. She made plenty. That turned out to be enough.